Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chair of the Humanities Forum, which organized today's event. It's really nice to see an audience here live. We've been doing that for 6 months to a year now with pretty good sized audiences again. And of course, that's our lifeblood here. But we also live stream our programs. And Arlie and I did a program last year also. And so we're here for her new book, Stolen Pride, Arlie Hochschild, retired sociologist, not really retired, but professor emeritus at UC Berkeley. And she's done a book before, and now this book about trying to understand the mindset, the thinking of a large number of people in certain parts of the country. One was in Louisiana, one was in southern Louisiana, this one is in Kentucky, so that we have an idea about how they're thinking. And I think it's really, really useful because all the people that you choose, you have a cast of characters through the book. It's such a wide variety of reactions. And I think it's really crucial that we don't think of people in terms of just one way of thinking about something. And it's such a wild difference. Even though they agree on some things, it's still such a wild difference. And we'll go into that. But we of course now, after we decided to do the program, because we decided to do the program months and months and months ago, J.D. Vance stepped into the picture because he got picked a little bit unexpectedly. And his book, Hillbilly Elegy, is about exactly the same part of Kentucky that Arlie wrote about. Mm-hmm. And so we'll refer a little bit to that, but we're going to go through Arlie's observations. Now, this was done, your research started before COVID, right? Before COVID. Yeah. But then you had to do a lot of it online. So why don't you tell a little bit about the process of talking to these people, because I'm sure you, especially if you told me you came from Berkeley, you probably, if you didn't avoid telling them that, it probably got some kind of a reaction. So.
You know, I never avoid it, but I handle it. You know, they have a certain look that comes on their face. You know, where are you from? Oh, I teach. That's even worse. Sociology, even worse. In Berkeley, California, and it was kind of a aghast expression. But then they'll be saying, well, you know, a lot of people have ideas about us hillbillies here, and you know, they stereotype us. And I said, yeah, I know about stereotypes about Berkeley, California. so then we had that in common. Oh, yeah, so you feel that too. You know, there are ways to, we were just having a conversation, Carol and I, about how do you intuitively find common ground so that you can have, it opens out a space in which you can have a real conversation. And so, anyway, yeah, Berkeley. So, how did I get there and what did I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I got there by accident. The phone rang, and it was Ro Khanna, who's a Democratic congressman. He represents Silicon Valley, California, and I'm wondering why he's calling. Maybe it's money, I know. So, he said, no, I thought you'd be interested. I crossed the aisle in Congress and made an arrangement with Hal Rogers of Paintsville, Kentucky, who represents Congressional District Kentucky 5, which is the whitest and second poorest in the whole nation. So you've got a rich area, a democratic area, an urban area, and a poor area, rural area, a Republican area. Those two congresspeople got together and set up a cold to coding program. Mm-hmm. Ro Khanna had, he said, we have a lot of coding jobs to code cell phones, to program cell phones. It takes 6 months to learn how to do it. And we outsourced those jobs to Bangalore, India. Maybe we could insource those jobs to unemployed coal miners in eastern Kentucky. And so that's just what they did. They got the Appalachian Regional Commission to kick in some money so it could be 6 months free training. And he said, would I be interested? Yes, I was ready after having written Strangers in Their Own Land. I was ready for some good news and ready for some models of crossover between the parties and economic development in the poorer areas of the country. So I went to interview unemployed coal miners and people in that area who had very low-wage jobs, who applied for the program, got it, and whose lives were transformed. And I followed them into their homes in eastern Kentucky and trailers in the hollers. And I thought, oh, I'm where I want to be. I'd really like to find out what's going on. And then once there, that was the first stage of getting my curiosity up. The second was finding that in this second poorest and whitest area of the country, congressional district, there was a perfect storm. Coal jobs, the only good jobs in town, it was one industry area. Only good jobs were as coal miners. Coal jobs were going out. Opiate crisis was coming in because highly under-regulated states, so the government didn't know that a company was exploiting this poor area because it had a lot of coal mining related injuries, and people needed pain relief, and what was sold to them were addictive pain relief. It's called OxyContin. So good jobs going out, bad addiction coming in, and then I learned that there was a white nationalist march coming to town, led by Matthew Heimbach, a kind of notorious neo-Nazi. And I thought, oh, God, this is a perfect storm. Right? Vulnerability, and then, oh, terrible answers that would make things worse. And then I thought, well, let me stay here and let me interview the perpetrator, the city fathers trying to prevent any violence, the potential victims, African-American woman, a Holocaust survivor in the area, an imam that ran a little church, mosque, no. And then let me interview people, faces in the crowd, from the top to the bottom and politically side to side. So that's the assemblage of people, and that's kind of how I did it. But the biggest secret is actually it's fun to do these interviews and listen to people. And they, although it's a very suspicious area and you shouldn't go up a holler unless somebody knows you, and be sure they're looking out the window when you come. Although there is that diffidence, people want to tell their story. And I wanted to hear it. So that's why I do this work way beyond retirement. I love it. But yeah.
Well, it's a great way to tell the story too, because you, as I said, you picked out maybe 15 people, something like that, as the main ones, and told their stories, and gave them all some credit for different things that they did right, some of the things that they did wrong, and also what their background is like. And I find that there obviously are similarities, but there's a lot of differences too. And all the little splits, like the couple that's happily married, that he was too poor for her. She wasn't exactly rich to start with, right? Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about the characters. So let's talk about Matthew Heimbach for a little while, because he's a very interesting character. And I think the book does a very good job, which we're going to have to lead over, of laying out what was going on at a certain time, and then what was changed later, and then what the final thing was for each person. But I think that would be kind of complicated in our conversation. Yeah. So we'll take a couple of examples of what happened. So Matthew starts off, and he's this neo-Nazi, well-known, and he's trying to lead. He's got an unusual name for his group in Illinois. What is it called? I don't remember it doesn't matter. It wasn't an obviously
traditionalist, Workers' Party.
Yeah, something Workers' Party. That doesn't even
traditionalist.
Traditionalist Workers' Party, not obviously a neo-Nazi, but he was. Now he's organizing this march in Pikeville, Kentucky. Why did they choose Pikeville?
Everybody wondered that, but there is some correlation with being white and being poor, and being afraid of, unfamiliar with blacks. So, but I wonder if we could back up a little. The real reason that I'm doing this is, in a way, to not just to meet these characters,
right,
but to invite us to become bilingual and here, in a way, listen in on Donald Trump's appeal to poor whites. What is going on? I feel like Democratic side of America, is listening to one set of things people say, and the Republican side of America is listening to another. So it's really an invitation to become bilingual, rational, emotional, because there is a logic to emotion. We need to think rationally about how emotions are being appealed to. And the basic story is that I found in Little Pikeville a microcosm of a story that applies to 42% of all Americans who are white and without BAs, so blue-collar whites. And the story on the national level is that whites without BAs over the last 2 decades have lost ground in their income, in their property, absolutely lost that, and suffer many other social things that go with downward mobility. In worse health, more people live alone, marriage is not so steady, a susceptibility to what are called deaths of despair, that is alcoholism, drug addiction, suicide, especially for men. So that's the group, and it's lost both over the last 2 decades, absolutely and relative to whites with BAs, for whom the arrow is up, and relative to blacks with or without BAs, who, starting much lower, also have an arrow aiming up. So they feel both absolutely and relatively in a loss story. So my story theoretically begins with loss. And then as a second piece to the story, what do we add to this loss story? And again, in Pikeville, they've lost coal jobs. There's social distress, loss of community that goes with the drug scourge. So one guy explained the connection between loss and shame, because we don't just have an economic story, we have a cultural story. Here are people that really adhere to an individualism-oriented culture of pride and shame. So if you do well, that's you that can feel pride. And if you fail, you get laid off, that's on you. Something you did is wrong. The paradox, why I call it a pride paradox, is that in blue states with more upward mobility, better economic conditions, people have a more circumstance-oriented culture of pride. They take a sociology class that says, actually, there's a certain economic sector that you're in. It's going up and down. Don't blame yourself for this. So the people here are likely to blame themselves for bad news, and they are suffering bad news. So that's kind of a vulnerability. But how does this loss translate into shame? I asked one guy, I'd love to just read this little piece. He's was a 12-year heroin addict. Mm-hmm. This is James, you've read.
James, right.
And overdosed 4 times. Most interesting guy in the book. He's spoiler alert, he's doing great now. But something about his re-entry into his own culture gave him a sensitivity. He could see things that I feel others didn't. So over lunch, this grandson of a coal miner told me, and I'd asked him, we've got loss, but how does it turn to shame? Shame comes gradually. Let me give you an example of guys around here where I live. That's Turkey Creek. First thing, a guy gets his layoff slip and he blames the inspector, then the supervisor. Then he shakes his fist at the Obama administration for putting in the Clean Air Act and adds in Biden and the Democratic Party and the deep state. Then, when his unemployment runs low and his wife asks for money for groceries for the kids, he faces a hard decision. If you need money and don't have a degree, you've got to leave. But his family's here and he doesn't want to leave. That's when he starts to feel bad about himself. He looks around at the jobs on offer at $9 an hour, $10 an hour, and he turns his nose up at what he thinks of as girly service jobs because he can't support his family on that kind of money. But then his partner says, we need to feed the kids. So he takes that crap job. And she says, after a while, there's still not enough money for food, gas, and fixing the roof. And then it's his shame begins to get stronger because now he feels the problem's on him. And if he leaves on Route 23 looking for work, industrial cities of the Midwest, Cincinnati mainly, and he comes back empty-handed, that's shame waiting for him at home. And then if he gets into drugs, take it from me, he's ashamed. And that can lead to divorce and separation from his kids, and now he's on the dole. He always felt superior to others he saw on the dole, and now he's on it too. So he's ashamed about that and mad that he's made to feel ashamed. Then he may read some op-ed in the Appalachian News Express calling people like him deadbeat dads for not supporting his family and paying taxes the town needs for the sewer repair. He's not a contributor. On top of that, he sees on the internet people outside the region firing insults at him as ignorant, racist, sexist, homophobic. Now he's mad at the shamers. And by this point, he's forgotten about the shame. He's just plain pissing mad. So we've got shame there. And the argument of the book is that Donald Trump, I was a shamed guy, I think, personally. He's probably got a learning disability, doesn't read. But he's brilliant, as many people with learning disabilities are, at knowing about shame. And I think he's drilled, as if he were prospecting for coal, drilled into the emotional ore of shame. And that he offers us, if we are bilingual enough to hear it, a kind of a 4-moment anti-shame ritual. And it goes on pretty repeatedly if we can hear it. And moment 1, Donald Trump says something transgressive, like all immigrants are poisoning the blood of America, or they're eating our pet dogs or cats. Okay, something that's shocking, transgressive. It's not enough that it be extreme. It has to be shocking. Okay. Moment 2, the punditry shames Donald Trump for saying the shocking things he said. You can't say that. You're an American. You're a president. We're an immigrant society. How insulting. Look, it's not even true. You can't repeat things you know aren't true. So the punditry shames Donald Trump. That's moment 2. Moment 3, Donald Trump becomes the victim of the shaming punditry. Look what they're doing to me. Do you know how hard it is? Businesses are closing off. Macy's closed off the menswear division because of what I said about immigrants. And it's hard. I'm losing business. I'm a victim. You, my followers, you know about being a victim of shaming, right? And they're trying to do to you what they're really doing to me. They're coming for you next. I'm taking the hit for you. I am your guy. So I'm hurting, and I'm hurting for you. He bonds himself to his followers as a victim of shame. Then in moment 4, he gathers himself up and he roars against the shamers. And now the list is very long. The nefarious American press, the Democratic Party, the deep state, the justice system, immigrants. And I think that the Democratic side of America is listening to moment 1 and 2, the transgression and the shaming, and that the Republican side of America is listening to he's a victim and he's pushing back. And that this whole ritual, each piece of it changes as we've gone through time. It's gotten bigger and bigger. And he has gathered other victims with him, including now the January 6th indicted people in jail. They too now are victims for you. And he's developed the whole idea of retribution in what I'm sure we all perceive as a terrifying way. He wants to destroy. If we take him at his word, which I think we should, democracy itself. Okay. So we have to kind of tune in to this situation. I think his very shamelessness, it's interesting, is a positive for them. I've asked people, what do you think? I actually tried this ritual idea out on the leader of the East Kentucky Patriots, who had a 22-mile vehicle parade in 2020, flags and hoots and hollers. And the leader of it, who thinks God has chosen Donald Trump to lead them out of the wilderness, And I said, okay, I'm coming from Berkeley, California. I'm really interested in, emotions and how they connect to politics and how they can be appealed to. And I think there's these 4 moments in an anti-shame ritual. What do you think? Let me just try it out. Yeah. And I said, well, do you think that Donald Trump pokes the bear? In other words, he finds another provocative thing so that people will object, and 2 happens, and then 3 happens, and 4 happens. Yeah, I think he does that. I asked another Republican guy who said, oh, yeah, and the left falls for it every time, he says, and the media makes a ton of money on it. So this wasn't news to them. I got interested in how they felt about Trump's own shamelessness. Mm-hmm. And they would say, yeah, you can't shame Donald Trump. Nope, you can't do it. They would stay with the description. And I said, well, sometimes, don't think he lies? I mean, doesn't that happen? Oh, yeah. And then he doesn't back down. Yeah, that's true. He'll kind of stop with a description, and I get a sort of feeling of appreciation that that's really strong of him. A sign of, what a strong guy.
They wish that they didn't feel shame.
No.
They wish they were as shameless as him.
They'd like to be. I think they're not, actually. They're more decent than that, in fact. They're really... But, I found the same kind of shame shielding, I came to call it in the book, with Matthew Heimbach, who's on the spectrum, by the way, and hugely bright, but can't see or feel the destruction and harm he does with his thoughts. But he would say with great feeling, well, Heimbach is a German name. My father has German ancestry. And my mother, she came from the South and Southern ancestry. I will not be shamed. Mm-hmm. Where did that come from? It's just so something. That's what, with this bicultural, if we listen to the emotions, you think, whoa, I'm being told something here. And
do you feel that a bigger thing than just being from Kentucky? Do you think that this idea that you should be ashamed to be white,
yes,
is making them furious because
it is making them furious? One guy, maybe I'll read you one more guy, who is furious at being told he's privileged. Mm-hmm. He began by saying, he began this way when I first met him. I'm trailer trash, okay? So you call yourself that? Well, what do you mean? Here he says, on the news, he's not a Democrat or a Republican, but he's a person who could be a Democrat if the Democrats were doing things right, is my little editorial here. On the news, you hear a lot of talk about race, but not a thing about poverty. Neither party is telling it like it really is. Growing up in our elementary school, we just had a few black kids. One was Alan. Our bus driver adopted Alan out of foster care. Alan always told me that the way I talked about Moore's Trailer Park, where I grew up, made it sound a lot like the neighborhood in Detroit, where he grew up. I've never been to Detroit, Michigan, but I'll bet Alan's family is a street version of Moore's Trailer Park. if you look at a white trash person and you look at a ghetto trash person, there's no difference. Bad jobs, if any, drug addiction, drug trade, crime in jail, ripped up families, fights. When I was a baby, I had a gun pointed right at me. Cops are harsh here, like cops are harsh in Detroit. A lot of them, Detroit residents, are on government assistance, so are we. Blacks scam the government, we scam the government. When I heard Reagan complained about welfare queens, I didn't know that applied to black women with a lot of kids. We have welfare queens, my family included. My family is full of alcoholics, drug addicts, dealers, murderers. I don't talk to them. You know, the black comedian Dave Chappelle, he jokes about the poor black experience. You see a toddler asking for crack. It's the same in Martin County, maybe not crack, but pain pills. People could think I'm a more trailer park sort of person, okay? And that's pretty much like a black ghetto sort of person, a poverty person, okay? But saying that, I would be dismissed as a communist among conservative neighbors and as a racist by the left. So he's saying, look, I don't have a narrative as a poor white man. If you're middle class and white, he says, actually, he probably says it better, but they say, good for you. You know, you worked hard, you can be proud. And if you're poor and black, they say, oh dear, racism prevented you from rising. You can still be proud. But me, if I'm white and still poor, I'm less than nothing, he said. And so who do I vote for? He has nothing. He's not drawn to Trump. He's saying Trump just wants tax cuts for the rich. And he's a scam artist. But the left has disappeared into identity politics, and there's no talk of poverty, Unite says. In the end, he said, the only thing that brings that's different between poor blacks and poor whites, he said, is the music. We've got twangy, tragic, and they've got rap. Mm-hmm. And I tried that out on the next person I was interviewing about, and the next person, oh, you haven't heard about hillbilly rap? And I thought about that, you know, that maybe the artists were seeing the connection a little better than the politicians were.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about the pride paradox. I found that very a useful idea, that the people who are in the blue states and don't quite have the same individualistic idea about that they're responsible are doing better. And so they're better on both parts. And if you have that individualistic, I'm responsible, and you're in the poor state, then it's a double whammy sort of thing. I also found one of the statistics in your book really interesting about how many people, how little difference there is from rich to poor about what's the most important reason for getting rich. And that's to work hard. And you said that among the rich, it's like 93%. Among the poor, it's like 87%.
Yeah.
So there's like almost no difference at all.
Yeah.
That everybody has absorbed this American belief that if you work hard, sociology hasn't gotten nearly as far as they think. But everybody thinks that that's the main reason. Clearly, it's a reason, but that's a really high number, 87%.
Yeah.
It's even 93% is even very high for the rich people.
Yes,
I think a lot of them would realize that it maybe had something to do with their parents.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's that background on what you did. Tell the story about this march that was coming. So Heimbach is organizing the march. He's got like 15 or 20 different organizations all across the spectrum. So it sounded to me a little bit like, the people coming together to protest the Democratic Convention in 1968 in Chicago.
Yeah.
And everybody seeming to be on the same page, but totally on other pages.
Yeah,
That's the way this march was. And
Yeah.
and the march didn't amount to all that much, But the city fathers, I thought it was very interesting how they did that. Why don't you tell about the city fathers and mothers, and how they went about trying to minimize the impact of a march that was coming up and still accept free speech.
Yeah, it was poignant. Here's
and this. Sorry, one little detail. This march took place about 6 months before the one in North Carolina that got in all the news because of what Trump said.
Charlottesville.
Yeah, Charlottesville.
Yeah,
So
this was the trial
this was
run.
earlier.
Nobody knew it
Yeah.
except Matthew Heimbach and his Confederates. So here's how this began. The voice was polite. The tone was measured. The accent, that of an outsider to Appalachia. The call came on an early April morning in 2017 as mountainside redwood and dogwood trees were slowly opening a window to spring around Pikeville, Kentucky. The phone had rung, the office of Donovan Blackburn, Pikeville's city manager. My assistant poked her head into my office and asked me what we should do about a request for a permit to hold a march here down Main Street. The name was Matthew Heimbach. But we Googled him, and wherever Heimbach goes, he leaves a trail of violence behind him. Indeed, only 9 months earlier, the man with the polite voice had co-led a white nationalist march in Sacramento, California, where people were beaten, kicked, and dragged, and 10 were hospitalized with stab wounds. So that was the event. And inside the movement, that part of it, it was almost comic that you had people that wanted to be seen. The KKK wanted to wear their white robes. They hadn't got to wear them a long time. And
the last time they dry cleaned it was long ago.
Yeah.
Got to get that use in there.
That's right. And
people feel that way about their tuxes too. After.
This guy, described the KKK as kind of downwardly mobile itself in a curious way. Other groups, Proud Boys and so younger groups, are rising up, but the KKK is a little bit downwardly mobile. But then the neo-Nazis, wanted to get their swastikas up. But Heimbach wanted to do two things. He wanted to get his outrageously radical violent groups to cooperate with each other, right? And they didn't like each other particularly and hadn't cooperated before. But he also wanted to mainstream a very extremist set of desires. And so he didn't want them to have provocative white robes and didn't want swastikas. So his job was completely impossible, and they did want to be seen in their extremism, and they didn't like each other. So that was the internal story. But again, paradox turns out to be my favorite word. Paradoxically, Matthew Heimbach, as he goes through the arc of time. Now, this is a spoiler. The suspense will remain in the book, but as he goes through time, he changes his mind. Mm-hmm. And he tells me in about my 12th interview with him, when I came there, I shouldn't have just said this is just for whites. Poverty is every race and should be for blacks too. So he changes his mind. And at one point, he's looking at getting a nursing degree, if only he'd get the money to go. My husband says I caused this, but I did not. So he goes in that direction. He's still he's still violent. He didn't. Yeah.
He didn't take too many steps away.
Yeah.
But superficially, it looks like
Yeah.
he's at least moving in the right direction.
Meanwhile, another character in the book is Donald Trump, who starts by, well, I won't say moderate, but he increasingly, he has, after all, been our president. He increasingly becomes closer to Matthew Heimbach. He embraces the far right, the Proud Boys. He incites January 6th. He invites neo-Nazis to Mar-a-Lago. So you have the extremist becoming less extreme, and you have Donald Trump becoming more extreme as crossed wires in this book. And yet they are still voting for Donald Trump.
One of the things I thought about the story, about all these different groups and everything, and each one wanted to do something different, and he was able to get them to do what he wanted them to do to a certain extent, and then they marched through the town and had their little parade, and then they were done. They all went back and got drunk and talked about how wonderful it was that they did. But it reminded me of a lot of things.
Sang racist songs.
Something around the campfire. And part of it that's interesting to me is it's like if they'd only known, the good thing about anarchy is that it's very hard to get it organized.
Yeah.
It just goes together,
Yeah.
So you told the story, and we might spend only a little bit of time on this, but I thought it was very interesting, of three different people: Ruth Mullins, John Rosenberg, and Dr. Saeed, we'll say
Bougie.
Yeah. And it was interesting how they each had arrived in this town, and you think they should have noticed when they arrived, but they were each. So Ruth Mullins is, if I remember, about 73 years old, African-American civil servant, retired. And Jonathan Rosenberg is 88.
Black.
And black, that's right. And Jonathan Rosenberg is a Jewish civil rights lawyer who's retired and in town.
And a Holocaust survivor.
Who
says, "Oh my God, not again."
Yeah. And the Muslim doctor who came from India and got educated and then on a program to try to move doctors to places that weren't served that well, ended up in Pikeville, Kentucky. Boy, that's a tough. And he ran a little mosque as well, in addition to being the doctor. I'm sure he was well loved as the doctor because they had a doctor. And
yeah, they need.
so he was, but those three of them, and they're all elderly.
Yeah.
So it was interesting how they reacted to the thing. Why don't you tell a little bit about those three?
So in my Rashomon around this event, I wanted to look at these potential victims, how they saw it. All of them said you'd never want to stir up the fringe. We're vulnerable to people like Matthew Heimbach. And the African-American retired civil servant kind of had a sense of, look, I've been here before most people, my people came from Alabama. And I've been in Kentucky, for, I guess it's 80 years, the family has. And so she said, but there was a guy with a Trump flag, 3 houses down from mine, and it disturbs me. It's the fringe. You don't want to. But she describes her experience in integrating Pikeville High, and she felt fully accepted, and she said, there isn't a race problem here. He's bringing it in. We need to. He has a right to speak his mind, but let's get rid of him. The the imam's assistant on the phone asked me what I wanted to talk to the imam about. I said, well, mention the word Donald Trump, and his voice suddenly raised. I'm sorry I'm talking to you like this, but no, Donald Trump has it wrong. We didn't, cause, the New York disaster, and we're good people. We're good people. So fear, okay, and then. This wonderful Holocaust survivor, lawyer, retired, fantastic guy, said, I have a speech prepared. Every time the radicals come out, I give a speech. I've got it in the drawer. I brought it out, make sure I know where it is, if they call on me to give it. And he had accommodated, Pikeville was his home. He described, Kristallnacht, and he was just a 7-year-old when it happened, and how they, by the grace of God, got out of Germany, and harrowing tale. And so he now says, but we live here now, and my neighbors are evangelical Baptists, and my wife and I put food together for the homeless, and we do this on a volunteer basis, and we make friends with them. And one of his co-volunteers said to him, oh, well, you're a Jew, you're the chosen people. Actually, I am Jewish, but I don't think I'm a chosen person. I think we're all chosen people, and lucky to live in this chosen place. And he said, she worries about me, that I won't get to heaven because I'm such a good person. And I love it that she worries about me. But no, So there are these sweet kind of cultural encounters that happen in every corner of this social life. These are details, but they feel like precious little crystalline details in it. The imam in front of his mosque had, when this march was coming to town, he was worried because 9/11, there was a broken window, and he were blamed. But there was an Iraqi, an Afghan, it was an American, had been an Afghan vet, and he made a friend of an Afghan who was an interpreter and who got an American visa and came to be his neighbor. And now they were both policemen, and one. So he said, "No, we'll take care of you," And the mayor of that town, "Don't worry, we'll take care of you." So there was actually this small town beauty to a kind of a community that saw this extremism as something to guard against.
I thought it was such an interesting part of the story that this march through was like a ripple that went through that caused no other ripples, and
Right.
the community all saying, every part of it that you described did not react to it as something to entice them to do anything. They used it, like you said, this policeman who was locally born that had made friends with somebody in Afghanistan who worked with him. He helped him leave Afghanistan at that time, and now he's working. They're both policemen. They're helping this Muslim doctor, who obviously probably is a very honored part of the community, regardless of what he believes. He's the doctor. So I thought it was very interesting. And the city manager, everyone's saying, no, free speech is most important. We're going to let them come through, but it didn't do anything to the community. And it's a very, I just said, very poor, very white, very Trump voting
Yeah.
group, but they don't want to have anything to do with this. I always like that was interesting. I'm a Trumpist, but I'm not a Nazi. He said.
It's right, and Trump's incendiary, in so many ways, and really his talk is always tinged with violence. But I didn't find that, this about to be lit to fire community. It was not like that. It was kind of a law and order place, but it wasn't mean. It was. But it went for Trump. So
one of your great lines was one of the characters, if I remember, was, having trouble on drugs and everything, started to go down the hole of he had plenty of time and was reading all the websites and doing all the right-wing stuff, and he was getting pulled totally into it until QAnon, and QAnon was one of his favorites, until QAnon mentioned that there are lizard people.
Yeah.
As soon as, oh no, that's ridiculous, he said.
Yeah.
And that was it. Then he dropped out. And I thought that was a really good example of somebody getting yanked in and then saying, no, I have a limit. I'm not buying that argument that Queen Elizabeth is actually taken over by some lizard alien from another.
Right.
That was a step too far. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because it's always nice to see that there's a limit. So there are a lot of other characters, and I want to talk about the felon, Wyatt, the outlaw pride. I thought it was another interesting idea that you had, that this guy had pride for being an outlaw. Yeah. And he was racist in prison, but his life did not get led that way, et cetera, et cetera. Complete bundle of contradictions.
Yeah, and then maybe
But a charming guy.
Should open it out to questions.
Yeah.
This was a guy who, so going back to pride, people have different bases of it. I feel that there is a material economy and a pride economy, and that can be high and low on both. Mm-hmm. And that at this moment in history, our politics is drawing as much on pride and culture as it is on economics. This community got nothing from Donald Trump in the 4 years he was president. He didn't bring back coal. He didn't, bring in new jobs. His tax cuts didn't help them. They're poor. But they did get a lot of pride, somehow an acknowledgement from him. So I think there are instances where that's the case, and this is, I think, an instance of that. And so some people had bootstrap pride, old-time American dream, work hard, get their pride. There was also outlaw pride. And I think Donald Trump is appealing to that now, if not, and bad boy pride. I got respected. A lot of the prison talk was, I really walloped him, bad one. I got respected. And the more you do that, the more respected you feel. I also was fascinated by some prisoners who are in for their crimes, they're doing time, who one guy said, I used to think, the badder I was, the better it was, the prouder I was. But then one guy was praising me, oh, you really gave it to that black guy, you good for you. And he said, it didn't work on me anymore. I was fascinated. When does that kind of acknowledgement, no, I don't want that pride. I'm out of it. How people get into and come out of little systems of pride, and how they try to cash in their local pride on a national pride economy is fascinating too. a lot of people from the South, go to college and they see that everything they're proud of is now disdained, in an urban, educated environment, and they can't cash in a way their local sense of regional pride. We don't understand this. I don't fully understand it, but I do think there's something hugely important for us to get that has to do with pride hierarchies, because this is a group. Donald Trump is appealing to a group that have lost pride, and he is telling them that lost pride was stolen from you, which is the title of my book. And so that seems a big deal. It feels like we've got to understand that. We've got to speak to it. We've got to offer better answers to it. But that just focusing on the economy or ignoring or thinking he's nuts, it's important for us to go beyond that. And that's why I've written the book.
All right, I'm going to get the mic, but I want you to tell the story about the heroin addict who got out of it by seeing the carrier ant.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you got that, Billy? Okay, great.
I love it that you love the people. I, by the way, have given the book to everybody that's in it, except not the fellow. I'm supposed to keep him anonymous. What do people feel proud of? I'll just give you this story and then we can talk. One man, a recovering alcoholic, was really part of this pattern of diseases of despair that are hitting white, poor men. And it's a big deal. It's completely isolating them. They feel isolated. They feel ashamed, isolated, depressed. And then addiction takes over, has a logic of its own. And this man, I said, well, how did you get out of being alcoholic? His parents had been alcoholic. He was advised by a therapist to go to a recovery clinic. And he said, well, I got there, I wanted to die. He said, I didn't want to get better. And then I felt bad, but I went out of my room and sat in a plastic lawn chair and looked down between my legs at the ground. And then I saw a line of ants, and each ant was carrying a tiny crumb. And one ant was carrying another ant, a dead ant. And it came to me, I don't want to be that dead, carried ant. I want to be the carrier of that ant. And that was his epiphany. And now he is a counselor in an addiction recovery program. And he led to the recovery of James, the recovered heroin addict who was a major sage in this book. So he was proud. And when we think of pride, we think, someone who's stuck up. And no, but pride, as I mean it in this book, is that kind of pride, to be of service, to be a contributor, being a helper. That's what people wanted. They wanted to be woven into a community and recognized and thanked back. And so simple, but so unavailable to them. Yeah. Somehow the Democratic, I think, the rhetoric, what we use, what we talk about, shouldn't just all be about dollars and cents. It should be about pride in this most basic sense.
You just want to be a valuable member of the community. And, and the irony is it's so simple. All you have to do is give a little more than you take.
Yeah.
You know, you don't. It doesn't have to be that you have $1 million. You know, some people say, I'm going to give $1 million. I'm going to give it to somebody. That doesn't work. So, Billy's got a microphone, so we have some questions. There's a couple back over here. Yeah. Anyway, that'll give you some idea about 1/3 of the really interesting characters in the book that she uses as examples for the experience of a whole area.
So, quick question. Actually, I have two really quick questions. First one, the story you told about the impoverished white man 20 minutes ago. Do these folks, have they ever heard of the Poor People's Campaign? The fact that,
No.
it's black and white and
Yeah.
et cetera, and they're
No.
absolutely trying to raise up
Or
all
Reverend
poor
Barber.
people. Reverend Barber, they don't know who he is. They don't know who Liz Theo Harris is. They don't know. Yeah. So it's just not out there. And the media doesn't cover it very well either. The other question, do you think somebody like Mr. Walls is somebody who might, if we can succeed in what probably most people in this room want to see happen, if he becomes vice president, you think this is a guy who might be able to reach some of these folks as a folksy American white man?
Yeah, wonderful question. Yes, I think if there would be. We just need to get him out there every day. You know, one person said, in a way, Donald Trump is kind of like an abusive dad, and a lot of people who relate to him, hey, well, that's just dad, he's gonna knock you on the head, and that's how he loves you. And that Waltz, by contrast, is the good dad, the helpful dad, the one who goes beyond, helps not only his kids, but the neighborhood kids.
Politics is that simple.
If only. Yeah.
Arlie, I really respect you, and I think you're brilliant, and I follow you. And what you said about the 4 steps, where Trump is drilling for the shame ore and the left and the right, and how they see the first 2 steps and then the other 2. I'm wondering if you have ideas for what could interrupt this chain reaction of Trump saying something outrageous, the media covering it, and him then becoming the victim. This 4 steps, is there something that you could think of that the Democrats could do? I also follow Reverend Barber. I pay for him every month, but unfortunately he's not in these towns. And then you're talking about shame, pride, community. These to me are all fit together nicely, but you have very clear steps that you're seeing happening in the political debate, the political conversation, the narrative. Do you have any way to disrupt that?
I was just the day before yesterday in Washington, D.C., meeting with some Congress people at the home of Rosa DeLauro, who's a Democrat from Connecticut, wonderful woman, co-founder of the Progressive Caucus in our Congress. And we talked about that. You've asked the basic question, I think. And let me say one more thing that's not an answer to the question, which is I've also talked to Mitch Landrieu, who's tasked with explaining to people Biden's extraordinary set of measures that are bringing dollars to places that need them. Extraordinary, really, if you look at his policies. And he said, I'm not getting any recognition. People aren't giving Biden credit for this. I don't feel heard. And he's asking me, what can I do to feel heard? And he's the guy out there, and he's a very vital spirit and good talker. So you're asking a deep, important question. and it has to do with healing a 2-decade kind of problem and unresolved grievance, and undo the fact that this aggrieved group in a major ethnic group, we have to say that, has been captured by a charismatic leader who leads by,
Can I say one more thing?
yeah,
The way Reverend Barber does it, I think, is very good, is he talks about low wealth people. And when you talk about people as low wealth, that makes them not a victim, that makes them not blamed.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something there.
that's good. Oh, I think you've answered your own wonderful question. Yeah, don't fit into shame. I guess we start with the negatives. Don't say, oh, or how piteous you are. They're very allergic to that. But I like that low wealth idea. And also, without talking about pride and shame, I think Harris could talk about optimism and pessimism, that the Democratic Party, certainly when Hillary ran, was all about, oh, the lucky forward story. The music was always rousing. Look, we're getting there. Everything's great. No, it has to be spoken to. A lot of us, have struggled. This has been hard. She needs to say that. And I get it that it's been hard. But on the party of addressing the issue. And we've become pessimistic. We've given up. I would talk about that. We're not pessimistic because we've got a way forward. So I haven't fully satisfied myself in this answer, but I love the question, and that's as far as I could take it.
What you just said reminds me, Trump says the nation's in decline.
Yeah.
The people who are in decline are going to say, yeah, you're right. And even though the facts, you can come back with the facts and say, oh, no, actually, we're up with this and we're up with that, we're up with that. They're not going to believe the facts. They're going to believe their experience.
We could say the nation's in decline, but the people are amazing, and this book will tell you they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Couple more questions.
What was the outcome of the Silicon Valley project that you started out with? What was the impact on the?
Well, huge impact on the people that were part of it, but it didn't scale up. It didn't scale up.
Was there potential for it to scale up?
Yes, I think so.
And what happened? Why didn't it continue?
Well, I think there's a reason that the company was called Interapt, and it made mistakes. It just picked I guess there were some 800 applicants, and they just picked 16 who were, it should have been it should have helped more people. So the Heritage Foundation accused this company, Interapt, of wasting government money. And I can see, actually, there were mistakes on the company's part, in my view. But it was a great idea, but no one else has scaled it up.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
I think your approach about stolen pride and stuff makes a lot of sense. How do you relate this to the increasing gender gap in many of these areas, and how that affects the men in this situation?
Yeah. Really interesting there is a crisis for manhood, I think, and Donald Trump is appealing to it. And what he's really promising is to put women back in their box. That's the big one, you know. So removing the right to make decisions about our own body is the key thing, and that's the purpose. And women, so he's appealing to those men and the women who identify with those men. But young women there are not going for it, even there, because they've got to work. And their men.
Does this emphasis on women's issues make the kinds of men you were talking to, feel even more, under the gun and being pressured and their needs being undermined?
Ignored by, oh, yes. Well, for such men, women and blacks are like immigrants coming in, and I think Donald Trump is using that. In this area I looked at, nobody's coming in, everybody's leaving. And yet, oh, those immigrants, whoa, coming in. Well, metaphorically, women are the immigrants and blacks are the immigrants. They're doing better, I'm doing worse.
Try to fix one social problem and you get three more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Arlie, for coming
Okay.
and talking about your book.
Wonderful. Thank
One more time.
Yeah.
And so ends another event at the Commonwealth Club in its 121st year of enlightened discussion. Thanks a lot for joining us here.